Grüß Gott. I've got 25 minutes, so we're going to have to go quite quickly. Obviously, you're a marketing and communications audience. I actually come from this world. This is where I started. But want to kind of make my presentation as relevant as I possibly can to you to think about, your jobs and the future of what marketing and communication looks like. I argue in the book that we're in transition from a linear world to a non-linear world. A linear world is one where we do things in a very kind of systemic way. If we think about the Henry Ford factory, raw material goes in at one end, finished products come out the other, and there's a very kind of rigorous timeline in which the way that things work. It's a way of how we think about the world. We talk about economies of scale. It's a particular way in terms of how we think about how we run many of our organizations. And I argue that we face a very big challenge, and that we are facing a world which is more complex, which is actually more linear, more non-linear. But the reality is also that non-linearity offers us to think very differently about time and people and the shape of organizations and the nature of communications and actually the nature of commerce itself, which ultimately have a big impact on all of you in this room. You may not be aware of it, you may be very aware of it, you may be somewhere in the middle, but this is really, I think, what I've sort of seen happening over the last few years. So the question we have to ask is, are we in a technological revolution or are we in a social one? Because actually there's a very intimate relationship between technology and the technologies that we use as a humanity and actually what we want as a humanity. So in the book, I talk a lot about what makes us as people and how that relates to the way that we engage with the world, the types of communication technologies or the technologies we use. But technology only succeeds when it meets fundamental human needs. So actually, if at the moment we are talking about social media, social communications, social networks, like I used to say 60-second TV spot in, 1992 or whatever, then we have to understand that there's something fundamental happening in our world where communication and the way that we're communicating with each other is reshaping our world. Now, when I was a young boy, I was listening to Muhammad Ali being interviewed by a very famous chat show host. And he says to Ali, you write poetry, don't you? And Ali said, yeah, I do. He said, what's your shortest poem? And Ali said, me, we. And when I was working on No Straight Lines, and I was working on this area around what makes us as human beings, I remembered this. I'm 49 years of age, so this is a long time ago, when I was 10, that I remember because Carl Jung writes, I needs we to truly be I. And I think that, just to go a little high level for a moment, we grew up in a world where actually I think, well, even not us, but our identity is actually kind of created by how we have meaningful relationships of all of the things around us. This image comes from the Shetland Islands, which is part of the British Isles, and they have a festival every year called Up Heliar, the Festival of Light. And these Shetlanders, the Shetland Islands, just in case you don't know, is sort of just north of Scotland, right? They celebrate their Viking roots. And over a period of a year, they come together and they build this life-size Viking boat, and then they take it down into the village, and they put it into the sea and they burn it, and then they get very drunk. And on your way home, the next morning, you might find the odd Viking sort of lying in a sort of hedgerow somewhere, because he's not quite made it home. But the point is that there's this deep connection of how these people are living and working together. And unfortunately, I think the world that we live in, the modern world, doesn't give us this type of kind of deep connection. So if we think about the word communication, where does the word communication come from? Because there's always a kind of underlying word that has deeper meaning to communication, and you're all communication experts here, right? That word is communion. It's about coming together and sharing together and creating culture together and creating meaning together. And of course, this is a big crisis for brands and branding and marketing, because actually we thought we were in the business of making all the culture and all the meaning and all the branding to make something desirable for people. And of course, what we're seeing is a shift where actually people are saying, well, we want to be part of the co-creation of that experience, or we want to have our own voice. And so the point is that identity is deeply networked and interwoven. And of course, we are living in a networked world. Fan fiction. If you're not aware of it, there is an extraordinary amount of fan fiction. When I was reading Lord of the Rings a long time ago, and I got to the last 100 pages, and as I turned that last page, one more page, I was getting really unhappy because I knew that I was on the end of my quest. And in a way, rereading the book again would never be the same because it was such an extraordinary journey of discovery. But I didn't do anything about it. But with Harry Potter, for example, or the Trekkies up here, they created whole communities of people. They're fans. They want to continue the story and the relationship. And so actually, after the Harry Potter films came out, people were setting up websites, they were creating communities, and actually Hollywood or Universal Studios was going around and said, you can stop that, you can stop that, you can stop that, you stop that, I'm not having any of that from you, you're going to jail and so are you. We create the culture, and you buy it, right? And people are saying, well, that's not what we want. That's actually not how identity and meaning and communication is all about. This is a false relationship between these things. So participatory cultures, as I like to talk about it, I have a bit of a problem with the word social media, only because there's something much deeper and more interesting and more profound about what is happening than actually saying, well, how many likes have you got on Facebook? Or what's your social media strategy, which is actually what are you doing on Facebook and what are you doing on Twitter? And we completely misunderstand this huge kind of context around why these things are changing. So it's no wonder then, and the first book that I wrote, which was called Communities Dominate Brands in 2005, which is the same year that Facebook, YouTube, and MySpace were born, has these kinds of numbers. Right? Technological revolution or a social one? Which one are we in? Which one leads the other? They're much, much more interrelated than we care to admit. And of course, if we start to talk about it from a social context, that all gets very complicated and difficult. Whereas we talk about technology, that's a really easy thing to talk about. That's got no emotional relationship to it. So, what does technology want? It wants what we want. And if at the moment we want a world which is different to the one that we grew up in, we are going to adopt those technologies to have a conversation with each other about what type of world we might like to live in. So our kids, particularly, I think I've got 3 children, 30, 25, and 15, but Joseph, particularly the youngest one, feels that he's inherited a world that perhaps he doesn't quite want. And that actually he might like to change that. So he's going to learn to code, or he's coding. And he's taking communication tools and he's creating his own culture. He doesn't watch TV anymore. We had a conversation last night. In fact, he says he doesn't even use Facebook anymore because there's far too many arguments that go on there. So he uses FaceTime and Twitter. So even within this really short period of time, I see them changing the way that they use communications. There are more mobile handsets in the world than there are people, and 80% of the world's planet is now covered by mobile communication networks. We are wrapping a living, breathing communications membrane around the Earth because we want to, not because mobile operators have spent lots of money doing it, because if we didn't really see this as a very powerful technology and useful to us, we wouldn't use it. Just some stats, tablets and smartphones, in a year, 140% increase in tablets. So it's changing the nature of how we're consuming. If you think about actually, when you watch TV today, if you're watching TV, do you have your tablet open? Do you have your mobile phone open? Are you actually using 3 screens at the same time as you're watching stuff? I actually tend to read my newspaper on my mobile phone whilst I'm watching telly, which I know is a really stupid thing to do because I'm supposed to be watching TV, but I'm bored. So I thought I'd go and read something else, but I don't want to turn the telly off. And I'm 49 years of age, right? So you think about communication, how are you communicating with people? So we look at our mobile devices something like 200 times a day. And I've got a friend of mine who said that's way too low, right? And so I think that we are really in this exciting, I think it's exciting, period where we are reshaping our industrialized world. One, because I think it's actually unsustainable in the way that it currently exists. I talk about being at the adaptive edge of our industrial society, not because I think it's done bad things to us, it's just that it can't deal with the challenges that we're currently facing in a whole variety of different ways. And the logic in terms of how we think organizations run from a linear perspective is different to a non-linear one. And so network solutions offer, I think, new frameworks, new ways of doing stuff and getting stuff done. YouTube is the biggest broadcaster in the world. And here it says, 100 funded commercial channels between 1 to 5 million each. And a friend of mine who runs a big TV production company in the UK, it's the third largest one, and they do F1 and World Rally, but they also do Renault TV. They took Renault TV off of a terrestrial station, they put it on YouTube, and their Q-on-Q viewing figures went up by 250%. It's a completely different way of how you think about a model of communication and broadcast. And of course, it's built around search and data, which is also something very important that I'm going to talk about. It's where Google says is that where TV meets the world of search and applications. And I think in our lifetime, in a very short period of time, the types of TVs that we think were traditional TVs are going to be very different types of machines. They're going to be much smarter than we ever thought when we were looking at those little black and white things in the corner when there was only one commercial TV station, right? And the BBC, with their iPlayer, and if you think about the rise of those smartphones and tablet figures, have seen a 30% increase in viewing figures by actually allowing people to access their content in a whole variety of different ways. So this is about how linear time becomes non-linear time. So when I travel out to London on the train, I quite often see people, watching stuff because it's the time for them to do it. And data plays a really important role in our future, as I said. So, for example, the LAPD have been running a trial where actually they're taking large data sets and using machine algorithms to actually start to predict where they think crime scenes may take place. And in your world, data is definitely going to play a really big role as well. For example, every time I open up Amazon, I get the Amazon recommendation engine. They are selling to me, but actually, do you know what? It's quite useful. And so I see it as kind of useful, but it's totally data fed. Also, mass customization then becomes also increasingly important. How can we really customize stuff? I mean, down here in the bottom corner, we've got a pair of shoes that I personally wouldn't wear, but somebody might want to. And up on the top right-hand corner is the first gun that was made with a 3D printer, which actually the US have just banned. So that's the level of mass customization that is allowing us to think about the world in a different type of way. And I've been saying for a very long time that we need brands or businesses of the future to be life-enabling, life-simplifying, and navigational, i.e. help me navigate through the complexity of the world that I live in. And of course, data plays a very important role in that. We want to be able to interface with our world, I think, without, interference. And so therefore, we have a very different type of way in terms of, I think, how businesses are going to be serving customers in the future, either in a way of mass customization or whether actually we are co-creating with them. And that we need to think about the curation of content and the filtering of content and the sense-making of content for people, because there is so much stuff out there. I mean, I think even again, in my experience, I am just overwhelmed by the amount of information that I'm trying to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and I know I can't deal with it. So if that's me, and this is my job, how do other people feel? We talk to lots of people about the fact that they feel burnt out by the amount of information that they're confronted with. And this isn't in the future, this is right now. This is what we need to be doing right now. So let's have a brief history of the future. I've got 10 minutes and there's a few case histories which I want to share with you that shows how some of these things are working. And I've always sort of liked to have the kind of how can we question. Unfortunately, in our industry, we far too often have the why we can't question, which normally takes about 4 hours, and I get very frustrated. And we always have to innovate. We've got to push forward from where we are. This plane is the SR-71 Blackbird, which was, when it was conceived as a vision, it was asked to fly higher than any other plane, twice, 2.5 times the speed of sound. And it meant that those engines would be burning at 2,000 degrees centigrade. There wasn't even a fuel system that actually could deliver that. But rather than saying, well, let's go back and do it how it was, right? They're saying, well, let's get innovative here. Let's get entrepreneurial. Let's really explore how we can do that. And this industry really needs, I think, to think very hard about how it innovates. Because otherwise, people like Google and YouTube are going to come along and they will take your business. So, Lego. We all know Lego. I'm sure there are maybe 1 or 2 Lego fans in the room. You can put your hand up if you want to, or you still want to. Yeah, there you go, you see? There's always one. So, Lego, right? We all know the model of Lego. Lego kind of went, well, you know, people love playing with Lego stuff. Every year we think about some new products, you know, a garage and, you know, whatever it may well be. We kind of think how much the market might want to buy of that. We then invest, so linear, right? We then invest in the tooling up and machining of those things. And then we do a marketing campaign and we roll that out in the hope that some people at the other end will buy our product, which will actually cover the cost and give us a revenue or profit of all that outlay, okay? But with the gaming industry coming in, they were totally disrupted. So how do we deal with almost certain death? Now, the Lego story is an interesting one because there's a little bit of serendipity that kind of went with it. But essentially, they went from one business model, one revenue stream, we have products in shops that people buy, to about 12. And they've really expanded and they've really explored how they survive in a fundamentally different world. This is a thing called Lego QSO, and what happens is that any one of you in this room, well, it's particularly when there's one person anyway, you're going to design your Lego product, and you put it up on here, and if you get 10,000 votes, Lego will make your product, you'll get your name on the box, and you'll get a 1% revenue share of all of that product sold. Sounds cool, right? And of course, the thing is what Lego QSO has done is taken that timeline, which is long, and it's inflexible, and they've done this with it. So they've shortened the time frame. So R&D is marketing, marketing is R&D, it's sales at the same time, and you've got fans of people that are going to support these things. And I was speaking at a conference in Amsterdam last week, and there was this guy actually, he's a woodsman, but his hobby is making beautiful birds out of Lego bricks. He's got, we hadn't spoken about this, and he went on before me and he said, well, I've got up on Lego QSO, I've got 5,000 votes. So if you'd vote for me, that would help me get my products made. But you're having a very different type of relationship with your customers by working with them. And I talk about the fact that we need this thing called the 4 Cs: commerce, culture, community, and connectivity. So we shouldn't talk about consumers anymore, where the only value that we have with them is actually how much we can get out of their pocket, but actually how we have a real relationship with them, and how and why we might have that. And Lego is a really good example of that. So why is Lego relevant to you? Well, I think that they had the wisdom to recognize that the old commercial model was broken. They had the courage to explore something fundamentally different. They listened deeply and were able to respond and to show that they listened deeply. How many brands do that? They recognized important patterns in what I call co-creation and the real benefits that they could bring that I've just discussed. An evolution of a new economic, social, and organizational model, and it's where marketing meets R&D. If we think about healthcare, we see the rise of Fitbit. Everyone know what Fitbit is in this room? 1 or 2, it's a thing that you have on your belt or in your pocket, and it tracks the amount of, calories you burn, the number of paces you do, whatever. But people are actually now publishing their Fitbit stats on things like Facebook or kind of whatever. And gamification is essentially the psychology of human motivation. On the right-hand side is Nike Fuel, which is a wristband that you wear. But this is my prediction. that Nike, within the next 5 to 7 years, will be running preventative health services in conjunction with proper health organisations, where we move from a world where actually healthcare is about sort of, dealing with the problem afterwards, where Nike is saying, we're going to help people be well so they don't go into hospitals, because actually that's something that we can't afford anymore in the way that we used to. So it's a really different way of thinking about the nature of the business being life-enabling, life-simplifying, and navigational, for example. So how do we create a business that sells fashion without the need for retail stores and all the associated costs? This comes from Japan, and it's called Tokyo Girls. The guy that set this up was told by the Japanese fashion industry he would never sell a single yen selling fashion off the mobile device. So all of the retail is done off a mobile platform. Twice a year, they fill out a football stadium, sort of like 80,000 girls. I suppose there's men in there as well, that come for the launch of this new fashion season. The girls that walk down the Girls Walker catwalk aren't highly paid models, but they come from the Girls Walker community. And what they do is they understand that mobile has a very different type of time context, that actually it's what they call blended time, and that nearly all of the purchases that are done are between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning. Why, I don't know. Right? So what they do is they create different types of content and experiences for that community when they want to be snacking on it during the day. But they understand that they need to create longer form content and more immersive content between the periods of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning. They've also got what they call a smart data matrix. So they have a profile in everyone. If there is a TV program or show that's being on, they know that, my name's Alana and I like this particular kind of model and I like red dresses, I will get an alert via my Girls Walker platform, which will say, hi, Alana, that dress that you really like on that particular actress, you can now buy that at Girls Walker at a 15% discount. I'm short on time, so I'll move on. A 45% response rate on mobile communications is not abnormal, okay, when you get it right. And this guy makes 100 million euros in revenues a year, and he flies around in a Learjet, when the retailing industry said he would never make a single yen selling accessories and fashion off the mobile platform. But that is all about commerce, culture, community, and connectivity. It's about a blended reality. It's about co-creation, and then allowing the girls to feel that they are actually part of and the co-creation of this brand and this experience. They're marketing to each other. They're bringing people together, but they're also using data in a very smart way to make this a compelling experience and turn that into revenue. The last one is threadless. How do we create a business without any cash? Anyone in this room know what threadless is? One. Okay. Yeah, you don't count. Well, the idea is this, that each and every one of you in this room is a T-shirt designer, or you would like to be. You fancy yourselves as a pretty cool graphic designer. So what we do is that we create a competition where each and every one of you creates a T-shirt design. And we are encouraged to discuss with each other how we can improve each other's designs. We might listen to that advice. We may choose to ignore it. At the end of the week, we vote in this room who's come up with the best design. And that person that we vote, the community votes, gets $2,500 US. But actually, it feels pretty good that, 10,000 people have also said, well, you did a pretty good job this week. And of course, this is what's happening with Threadless. They've deconstructed the organization, its commerce, culture, community, and connectivity. And they've created it like a network. But people are coming together, and people come together, and human beings come together to work and collaborate far more often for various reasons of human motivation, which have got nothing to do with money. And a linear way of thinking about commerce is people will only be motivated to work in our or for our business when we put money on the table. But actually, there's different types of capital. There's social capital. There's knowledge capital. There's capital of belonging and hanging out with your peer group, people that you admire and respect. And Threadless proves that actually, they've turned into actually quite an amazing company. I think they're selling something like $30 to $40 million worth of T-shirts working on this basis. So I think that, why are they relevant to you? Well, because they really have taken a very entrepreneurial approach to innovation, about running lean and being adaptive. They really think about the company as a community, and they embrace that properly. They are designing for what I call the human OS, the human operating system, which has got a lot to do with what makes us as people and why we're prepared to engage with each other. It is about the co-creation and the experience that they're really facilitating. And they gamify that through competition. And they share revenue. So sometimes sharing revenue is no bad thing. 100% of something very small is always going to be much smaller than, 90% of something or 80% of something much bigger. So what are the take-homes from this? Well, quite simply, I think that we have the capacity to really create different types of organizations, more compelling, engaged marketing and business communication experiences, which are more relevant for the world that we live in today, and that they are networked, they are participatory, they're customized, they could and should be multi-platform, and they are data-driven. The last point, disrupt yourself before someone else does it to you, is my advice. Okay, that's me. Vielen Dank.